Hello, boys and girls. Welcome to another edition of Grade 5 Science. Today's topic is climate and weather. Very exciting. But if you're not feeling motivated, remember the words of Marie Curie. Nothing in life is to be feared, it's only to be understood. Now is the time to understand more so that we may fear less. So, what are you waiting for? Grab a pencil and a notebook, get settled, we're about to start. To begin today's lesson, we're going to answer the question, what is weather? Weather is the state of the atmosphere at a particular place and time with respect to the wind, temperature, cloudiness, moisture, and pressure. There are various types of weather patterns. For example, we have sunny, rainy, windy, cloudy. But before we dive further into weather, let's understand what is climate and how it affects the weather. Climate is a pattern of weather that occurs over a long period of time, such as years and even centuries. For example, the climate in a specific area could be dry, which means rain rarely falls. However, on days when it does rain, the weather is rainy for that day. But the climate does not change. That place is still considered a dry climate. There are approximately 5 main climate types on Earth. The first one being tropical, second dry, third temperate, fourth continental, and fifth polar. Let's discuss each of these climate types. A tropical climate is known for being hot and humid. The average temperature is greater than 64 degrees Fahrenheit or 18 degrees Celsius. This occurs all year, and there is more than 59 inches of precipitation each year. The second type of climate would be dry climates. These climate zones are so dry because moisture is rapidly evaporating from the air and there is very little precipitation. The third one is temperate climate. In this climate zone, there are typically warm and humid summers with thunderstorms and mild winters. The fourth one is continental. These regions have warm to cool summers and very cold winters. In the winter, this zone can experience snowstorms, strong winds, and very cold temperatures, sometimes falling below negative 22 degrees Fahrenheit or negative 30 degrees Celsius, which is very, very cold. The final type of climate would be polar climates. In the polar climate zone, it is extremely cold. Even in summer, the temperatures here never get warmer than 50 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 degrees Celsius. Looking at the picture, we can identify places where the various climates occur. This globe represents the Earth. The top and the bottom are the North Pole and the South Pole. The poles are extremely cold, as we mentioned before. In the center, we have a line called the equator line. It's invisible, but it's a marker that helps to indicate the hottest points on the planet. Countries like Guyana, our own country, can be found close to the equator. That's why our temperatures are usually hot. Now, in between the equator and the poles, we have the dry, temperate, and continental temperatures. Continents such as North America and Asia can be described as continental or temperate, simply because during the summer, it's hot, but not that hot. And during the winter, it's extremely cold. Now let's move on to discuss why climate is important. Climate is very important. It can determine what kind of plants and animals can live in a specific area. For example, polar bears need a cold climate. They would be hot and would die quickly if they lived in the desert. When climates start to change, animals and plants become endangered. But what is climate change? Climates can change over long periods of time. Sometimes this is just the cycle of the earth, but sometimes other forces can have a big impact on the climate. Human beings have had an impact by building large cities and cutting down vegetations in places like the rainforest. This has led to an impact on the local climate. Other major events that affect the climate include volcanic eruptions and changes in the sun. Notice in the photograph, the glaciers are melting. Glaciers are found in the North and South Pole. However, due to the effect of climate change, these glaciers, which are home to many animals, including polar bears, are melting. With that being said, let's move on to discuss the effects of weather. The weather, which includes the sun, rain, and wind, affects humans, other animals, plants, and the environment. The sun, which provides heat and light, helps plants and animals to make food to grow and develop. Rain provides water for drinking and other domestic purposes like washing. However, too much rainfall can result in floods, which can ruin homes and crops. Living organisms can drown in flood waters. Very high tides can also cause flooding. On the other hand, if rain does not fall, it can result in drought, which reduces the growth of crops and animals. Notice in the photograph, too much rain can cause flooding, and little to no rain can cause drought. Also, the winds keep us cool. It helps birds and animals to fly. However, strong winds can cause damage to life and property. Very strong winds like hurricanes result in damage to buildings, crops, animals, and humans. To help you grasp the effects of weather, we will look at a case study. This case study is surrounding our own country, Guyana. On January the 15th, in the year 2005, hundreds of residents of Georgetown woke up to flood waters seeping into their homes. East Demerara Water Conservancy was unable to contain the water, and flood waters peaked around January 17 when the high lunar tide and usually heavy rainfall hits the area. Regions 3, 4, and 5 were most severely affected and declared disaster areas by the government of Guyana. Overnight, in the city and in coastal communities, thousands were forced to flee their homes. Some took shelter in hotels where rooms were all booked in a matter of hours, and close to 5,000 people stayed in temporary shelters. After January 19th, there was a lull in the rainfall, which allowed a significant amount of water to drain off higher grounds, but many areas were still flooded. Within days, floodwaters had overflown canals, many of which were clogged with silt and garbage. Agricultural health care was limited as hospitals were also subject to flooding. Rains continued until the first week of February 2005, but floodwaters receded slowly and the damage to low-lying infrastructure, agricultural production, and livelihood were beginning to show. More than 40% of Guyana's population lost some or all of their possessions. An outbreak of leptospirosis added to the death toll. In addition to raw sewage, dead livestock, and other animals contaminated the floodwaters. Warnings were issued to avoid playing in water and avoid contact as much as possible. Now that you would have heard the story, which is in fact a real story that happened in our country, think about these questions. What caused the flooding? How did the flooding affect Guyanese? And what can we do to ensure this never happens again? Discuss these questions at home with your parents. Now let's move on to the instruments that are used to measure weather. Weather instruments are important to meteorologists. A meteorologist is a person who studies the weather. They are able to analyze and evaluate the data collected from these instruments. This data not only details weather over time, but it helps to predict future weather patterns. The first weather instrument we'll be discussing is the thermometer. A thermometer measures the air temperature. Most thermometers are closed glass tubes containing liquids such as alcohol or mercury. When air around the tube hits the liquid expands and moves up the tube. A scale then shows what the actual temperature is. Here's a picture of what the thermometer looks like. Now let's move on to discuss the rain gauge. A rain gauge measures the amount of rain that has fallen over a specific period of time. You can observe the image of a rain gauge. The third instrument used to measure weather is a wind vane. A wind vane is an instrument that determines the direction from which the wind is blowing. Notice from the photograph, the wind vane is equipped with the cardinal points, that is north, south, east, and west. This helps the meteorologist to identify the direction from which the wind is blowing. Okay, boys and girls, it's time for us to conclude our lesson. Today we learned about the weather, the climate, and even the effects of weather and the instruments that are used to measure the weather. However, it's time for us to go. Thank you for tuning in, and remember the words of Marie Curie. Nothing in life is to be feared, it is only to be understood. Thank you once again for tuning in, and goodbye.